August 6, 1945. A test pilot climbs into the cockpit of America's newest jet fighter, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. He's the most decorated pilot in U.S. history, a national hero, the man who shot down more enemy aircraft than anyone else in the entire war. His name is Richard Bong. In just 11 minutes, he'll be dead. But that's not the story we're here to tell. Because the real tragedy isn't how he died, it is that most people have never even heard his name. This is the story of a farm kid from Wisconsin who became the deadliest American fighter pilot of World War II. A man so skilled, so fearless, that even his enemies respected him. A warrior who dominated the skies over the Pacific with 40 confirmed kills and then came home to a future that would never arrive. This is the story of Richard Bong. If you walked past Richard Bong on the street in 1938, you wouldn't think fighter pilot. You'd think farm boy. And you'd be right. Born in 1920 in Superior, Wisconsin, a tiny town on the frozen edge of Lake Superior, Dick Bong grew up about as far from the glamorous world of aviation as you could get. His parents were Swedish immigrants. His father, Carl, worked odd jobs and played the accordion. They were poor. Not poverty-stricken, but comfortable was never a word in their vocabulary. 9 kids in a small house. Hand-me-down clothes. Long winters where the temperature dropped so low you could barely breathe outside. This was Bong's world. But here's where it gets interesting. Because even as a quiet, awkward teenager, Dick Bong had one obsession: flying. Picture this. It's the 1930s, the golden age of aviation. Lindbergh has just crossed the Atlantic. Every kid in America wants to be a pilot. But for most, it's just a dream. For Bong, it became an unshakable fixation. He'd stare at the sky for hours, build model airplanes, read every aviation magazine he could find. His classmates thought he was weird. Teachers thought he was distracted. But Bong knew exactly what he wanted. The problem? He didn't have the money. Or the connections. Or, frankly, the personality you'd expect from a hotshot pilot. Dick Bong was shy. Painfully shy. He wasn't the guy giving speeches or leading the football team. He was the guy in the back of the class, quietly observing, rarely speaking unless spoken to. When he did talk, it was soft, measured, almost apologetic. But put him in the cockpit of an aircraft, and something changed. In 1938, at 18 years old, Bong scraped together enough money to enroll at a state teachers' college. Not to become a teacher. He had zero interest in that, but because it was cheap and offered a government-funded flight training program. This was the civilian pilot training program created to build up America's reserve of pilots as storm clouds gathered over Europe. And Bong was a natural. His instructors noticed it immediately. In the air, the shy farm kid disappeared. What emerged was something else: focus, precision, an almost supernatural ability to understand three-dimensional space. He could visualize where an enemy plane would be before it got there. He anticipated. He calculated. He didn't just fly, he thought. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, everything accelerated. America needed pilots, fast. Bong joined the Army Air Corps and was shipped off to advanced fighter training. And that's where the legend really begins. His training instructors gave him the same aircraft that would make him famous, the P-38 Lightning. Now, the P-38 was not an easy plane to fly. Twin engines, twin booms. It was fast, powerful, and absolutely unforgiving if you made a mistake. Some pilots hated it, said it was too complicated, too temperamental. Bong loved it. He understood the P-38 like it was an extension of his own body. He could push it to limits other pilots wouldn't dare. And he had a philosophy that separated him from everyone else: get close. In an era where most fighter pilots were trying to shoot from 300, 400 yards away, Bong would close to 50 yards. Sometimes closer. Close enough to see the rivets on the enemy aircraft. Close enough that when he pulled the trigger, there was no escape. His instructors were impressed, but also concerned. Because in late 1942, Bong did something that almost got him kicked out of the service before he ever saw combat. He buzzed a house. Not just any house. He flew his P-38 so low over a residential street in San Francisco that he literally blew laundry off a clothesline. He looped around the Golden Gate Bridge, flew under the spans, terrified dozens of civilians. When he landed, he was immediately called into his commanding officer's office. The officer was furious. Bong just stood there, expressionless, waiting for the punishment. But here's the twist. His commanding officer was General George Kenney. And Kenney saw something in Bong that others missed. Not recklessness confidence. Not arrogant skill. Kenney made Bong write an apology letter to the family whose laundry he'd destroyed. Then he shipped him off to the Pacific Theater with one simple order. Go out there and show the Japanese what you can do. That's exactly what Bong did. December 1942, Bong arrives in New Guinea. If you've never heard of New Guinea, don't feel bad. Most Americans hadn't either. It's a massive island just north of Australia, covered in jungle, disease, and at that moment, Japanese forces. The fighting there was brutal. Not the glamorous island hopping you see in movies. This was mud, malaria, and death. But in the skies above, that's where Bong came alive. His first kill came on December 27, 1942. A Japanese bomber. Bong closed in, just like he'd been trained, and opened fire at point-blank range. The bomber erupted into flames and spiraled into the jungle below. He felt nothing, no celebration. No adrenaline rush, just ... calm. That was Bong's secret weapon. Emotion didn't touch him in combat. While other pilots panicked, hesitated, or got overly aggressive, Bong stayed ice cold. He saw aerial combat as a problem to solve, not a life-or-death struggle, and that mindset made him lethal. Over the next year, Bong's kill count climbed steadily. 5, 10, 15, 20. But here's what made him different from other aces. He wasn't hunting for glory. He was hunting because it was his job, and he was very, very good at his job. Let me give you an example. April 12, 1943. Bong is flying patrol over the Huon Gulf when he spots a formation of Japanese fighters, Zeros, the most feared fighter plane in the Pacific. There are 8 of them. Bong is alone. Most pilots would radio for backup, maybe shadow them from a distance, wait for reinforcements. Bong dives straight into the formation. He picks the lead Zero, closes to 30 yards, so close his own plane is at risk from the debris, and fires a 2-second burst. The Zero explodes. He banks hard, right, finds another target, fires again. Another kill. The remaining Zeros scatter in confusion. They can't figure out where this lunatic came from. Bong shoots down a third before they finally escape. 3 kills in less than 90 seconds, all alone. All against a numerically superior force. Word started spreading through the Pacific Theater. There's a pilot out there who doesn't follow the rules, who fights like he has nothing to lose. His name is Dick Bong, and the Japanese knew it too. By mid-1943, Japanese intelligence had identified Bong as one of the most dangerous American pilots in the theater. They warned their pilots, if you see a P-38 with the name Marge painted on the side, that was Bong's plane. Named after his girlfriend back home, disengage immediately. But they couldn't always disengage, because Bong was everywhere. He flew missions over Rabaul, the heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, over the Solomon Islands, over New Britain. He wasn't just racking up kills, he was disrupting Japanese air operations across thousands of miles. And here's the thing people don't understand about being a fighter ace. It's not just skill. It's survival. You have to be good enough to kill the enemy and lucky enough not to get killed yourself. The odds are horrific. Most pilots didn't make it. Bong understood this. He wasn't fearless. He was careful, methodical. He studied his enemies, learned their tactics, anticipated their moves. And when he had the advantage, he struck without hesitation. By early 1944, Bong had 28 kills. He was tied with Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record. The press back home was going crazy. America's ace of aces, the headline screamed. Politicians wanted to meet him. Hollywood wanted to make movies about him. Bong just wanted to keep flying. On April 12, 1944, exactly 1 year after his 3-kill rampage, Bong broke Rickenbacker's record. Kill number 29. He was now the most successful American fighter pilot in history. And he still had a year of combat ahead of him. Over the next few months, Bong's legend grew. He shot down 2, 3, sometimes 4 planes in a single mission. He protected bomber formations. He engaged enemy fighters against overwhelming odds. He became the pilot everyone wanted on their wing, because if Dick Bong was with you, you were probably going to survive. But by late 1944, something changed. Bong was exhausted, mentally, physically. He'd been in combat for 2 years straight. He'd survived countless missions where death was one mistake away. He'd watched friends die, seen planes explode, pulled triggers that ended lives. And back home, Marge was waiting. In December 1944, after his 40th kill, General George Kenney, the same man who'd sent Bong to the Pacific, made a decision. He grounded him. "You've done enough," Kenney told him. "Go home, marry that girl, be a hero," Bong protested. He wanted to stay, to keep fighting, but Kenney was firm. And honestly, he probably saved Bong's life. Because in combat, your luck eventually runs out, and Bong had been testing his luck for 2 years. In December 1944, Richard Bong came home, 40 confirmed kills, the Medal of Honor, parades, magazine covers. Marriage to Marge in February 1945. He was 24 years old, America's greatest fighter pilot, a national hero. He had his whole life ahead of him. When Bong returned to the United States in late 1944, he was greeted like a conquering warrior. Ticker tape parades, radio interviews, newspaper headlines. President Roosevelt personally awarded him the Medal of Honor, but Bong didn't want any of it. He wanted to go back to the war. See, this is where Bong's story gets complicated. Because in the public imagination, he was this larger-than-life hero, the handsome ace, the fearless warrior. But in reality, Dick Bong was still just a shy kid from Wisconsin who happened to be exceptionally good at one thing: aerial combat. He didn't enjoy the spotlight, didn't like giving speeches or attending fancy dinners. He just wanted to fly. But the war was winding down, and the military had other plans for him. They assigned him to Lockheed's facility in Burbank, California. His new job, test pilot. Specifically, testing America's first operational jet fighter, the P-8O Shooting Star. Now, the P-8O was revolutionary. Jets were still brand new, dangerous, unpredictable. The British had jets. The Germans had jets. But the P-8O was supposed to be America's answer, a fighter that could outrun, outclimb, and outfight anything in the sky. The problem? It wasn't ready. Jet engines in 1945 were temperamental. They flamed out. They exploded. They failed in ways that piston engines never did. Test pilots were dying regularly, trying to figure out how to make these machines safe. And here's the heartbreaking part. Bong knew the risks. He'd survived 2 years of combat in the Pacific, where every mission could be his last. But test flying? That was supposed to be safer, routine, even. It wasn't. August 6, 1945, a Monday morning. Bong arrives at Lockheed's airfield in Burbank. Simple. At 2:30 p.m., Bong taxis onto the runway, throttles up, and lifts off. The P-80 climbs beautifully. Everything looks perfect. And then, at 500 feet, the engine quits. Just stops. In a jet, when the engine stops, you have seconds to react. Not minutes, seconds. Bong tries to restart. Nothing. He's too low to bail out safely. He's too slow to glide back to the runway. He has one option: try to belly land on a nearby field. He almost makes it. At the last second, the P-80 clips a row of trees, cartwheels, and explodes in a fireball. Dick Bong, America's greatest fighter pilot, dies instantly. He was 24 years old. He'd been married for 6 months. And here's the cruel twist of fate. August 6, 1945 was the same day the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The biggest news story in human history. The event that would end World War II. Dick Bong's death was buried on page 8. So why don't more people know about Richard Bong? That's the question I keep coming back to. Because, by every measure, he should be a household name. 40 aerial victories. The Medal of Honor, the highest-scoring American ace of all time. A record that still stands today, 80 years later. But he's been largely forgotten. Part of it is timing. His death was overshadowed by the atomic bomb. Part of it is personality. Bong wasn't flashy. He didn't seek fame. He didn't write a best-selling memoir or become a politician. And part of it is just the cruel randomness of history. Some heroes get remembered, others fade away. But here's what I think we lose when we forget people like Dick Bong. We lose the reminder that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect. Bong wasn't a smooth-talking, larger-than-life figure. He was quiet, humble, a guy who just wanted to do his job well. And yet, when it mattered most, when lives were on the line, he was the best. We lose the understanding of what real courage looks like. Bong flew 200 combat missions. He stared death in the face every single time, and he kept going back. Not for glory, not for fame, because it needed to be done. And we lose a piece of American history that deserves to be remembered. There's a statue of Richard Bong in Superior, Wisconsin, a memorial park. A few aviation museums honor him, but for most Americans, his name means nothing. That feels wrong. Because on those days in 1943 and 1944, when American forces were clawing their way across the Pacific, when every mission could turn the tide of battle, there was one pilot Japanese commanders feared above all others. A farm kid from Wisconsin who could outfly, outshoot, and outlast anyone who challenged him. A warrior who dominated the skies with a calm, almost clinical precision that his enemies never understood. A hero who came home, married the girl of his dreams, and died doing what he loved most. Richard Bong, America's greatest fighter pilot. 40 kills, 24 years old. Gone, but not forgotten. At least, not by those of us who choose to remember. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to Dick Bong's story. If you want to learn more about World War II aviation or other forgotten heroes, consider subscribing. And if you know someone who'd appreciate this story, a history buff, a veteran, anyone who values courage and sacrifice, share it with them. Because some stories are too important to let fade away. I'll see you in the next one.